Okay, so thank you very much to everyone. Thanks to Ariel. Thank you to Binalea, my daughter, who sets this up in the background. And a special thank you to everyone who's supported me and my website. Much appreciated. And that's the real main reason why we try to do these pre-Yom Tov sort of special sharing. And very much obliged to everyone who's participated. Let's try to say a few words in preparation for Pesach. Try to lay down a fundamental point or approach, if you like, and I hope to give you something unusual to think about, something to focus on, or maybe stimulate thought at your Pesach Seder, and something that's, I think, not often appreciated enough. So we are holding here 5784 Tafshin Pei Daled 2024, just before Pesach. And let me try to suggest to you a direction that I think you'll find, hope you'll find interesting and productive. And what I'd like to cover is one single theme, and I'm going to put the question in two ways and then try to develop it from there. This may take a little revision. It is built on many years of listening to Rav Moshe Shapiro talk about this particular subject. One of his practices was each year he'd speak about the same thing and add a new dimension each year over many years, maybe 30 or 40 years. And this was one theme that he would come back to time and again. So you can bet the farm, as they say, that this is basic and fundamental. Let me start with 2 points and then try to backtrack and put it in a way that I hope you'll find approachable and useful. The first point is that the purpose of the Exodus, the purpose of leaving Mitzrayim, was l'ishtamoidele. That means that we should come to know Hashem. And that means very uniquely and specifically the name of Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. We will see a little bit later that the name we're talking about is more deeply Ekyeh, the name of I am.
It's working now because I'm trying to get on and I thought I was knocking you out because I was going to send you.
Thank you.
Try that.
Okay, my very lovely assistant has just brought me tea. And so thanks to her. And I see one or two of her personal friends on the screen. I'm sure she's enjoying that. Springs, no less. Anyway, the point is that the purpose of the Exodus was to make known the name of Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, as it says, Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. My name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, I did not make known to the forefathers and mothers, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. Those generations were not made aware of my name. This needs explanation, but that's what it says. And therefore, from the very beginning of the process of leaving Mitzrayim, Hashem made his name known. We'll try to explain this a little bit more. And secondly, that he revealed a new type of miracle. It should be apparent to everyone that the whole story of the Exodus is miraculous. In fact, it's an aspect of Torah that every festival brings new miracles and new Torah to the world. New miracles and new Torah. The Torah is built on the miraculous, not just a side point and something sort of as an additional aspect or a proof of something more important. It's fundamental to realize that Torah is built on miracles. The Exodus didn't have to be miraculous. You can take a people out of another people with all sorts of practical methods. You can have Egyptian stock market collapse, you can have a COVID epidemic, all kind of things you can do to weaken a country. It doesn't have to be miraculous. Torah is built on miracles. It's an uncomfortable thought for the modern scientific mind. Needs explanation, needs examination, but the Torah is built on miracles. And Exodus from Egypt revealed a new type of miracle, what Rashi calls nes b'seich nes, miracle inside miracle. Those are 2 parallels. We try to explain how the parallel works. Making known Hashem's name that was not known before, and miracles that were never known before. Those 2 go hand in hand. We'll try to explain them. And the purpose of today's discussion is to try to understand why those 2 are the central focus, if you like, of the process of the Exodus itself. Why those 2? What do they teach us? Why are those basic to all that we are? And I'll try to explain them. And finally, the overarching purpose here is to understand why leaving Egypt at that critical juncture in Jewish history is basic to everything we do, basic to all of Torah, all of Judaism. surprisingly more than anything else, even the giving of the Torah. We don't have a Seder celebrating the receiving of the Torah. We don't have an obligation to say it every day and every night. The leaving of Egypt is the fundamental, and that is not easy to understand. It would seem at first glance that the receiving of the Torah is much more definitive of who we are, and nothing like the same effort goes into celebrating it and relating to it. And this needs deep explanation. So our goal is to understand overall, why is the Exodus from Egypt the basis of everything we do? Incredibly, even to the extent that when we celebrate Shabbos, and there's nothing more basic than Shabbos, we say Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, as if to say that even Shabbos, along with all the mitzvahs in the Torah, depend on the notion of an Exodus, which is strange. And in doing this, we want to understand two basic ideas. Why was the name of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, that name, not known before, and became known during the phase of the Exodus, most specifically Ekia, that version of the name. If there's time, we'll talk about that. And why is it so basic that a new type of miracle was revealed? What is the meaning of a new type of miracle and why? Okay, that's our agenda. And if you care to revise this shiur, if you listen to a recording, you after you've been through some of the material, these questions, I hope, will be more pointed. Let me begin with something that is so astounding that it's almost, what can I say? Something very astounding and so interesting that I'm sure if you mention this at your Pesach Seder, it'll be something fresh and something very, very thought-provoking. And that is the Rambam's description of how we fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story at the Pesach Seder. Let me spend a little bit of time on this because it is truly astounding and will be a key that you can use for understanding everything we want to talk about, and something that I think you will be able to use as a novel and very stimulating thought at your Pesach Seder. The Rambam, in the 7th chapter of the laws of Pesach, Matzah, Pesach, in the volume in Zmanim, which is where he deals with the festivals and time-bound issues, he says something which is so astounding that at first glance it certainly looks like a misprint. But you'll see it's not a misprint. There's something remarkable about what he says. And here's what he says. I will quote you the words. Do I have the volume here? I don't have it right here, but I'll quote you his words. The Rambam says, Mitzvahs esse minateri. It is a positive commandment of the Torah. Lesaper, to tell. Now, he begins with, before I complete the sentence, he begins with the mitzvah of telling the story of the Exodus. We know that that's the Torah commandment. We know that the command is to tell the story of the Exodus to the children. If there are no children, to the adults. If you're alone, you tell it to yourself. That's mitzvahs sipur yetzias Mitzrayim. And that, of course, is the mitzvah of the Haggadah. Haggadah means the telling over. Pesach means the mouth speaks. And so the mitzvah is to talk about the Exodus, the leaving of Egypt, and therefore the Rambam begins the laws of the Pesach Seder by talking about the mitzvah of telling the story. We know, incidentally, that the rest of the mitzvahs of the night really accompany the telling of the story. The matzah, the maror, the wine, those are appurtenances, so to speak. If you like, this is the ultimate show and tell. We're telling the story, but we're demonstrating and bringing it to life, acting it out, so to speak, with all the elements that are the mitzvahs that are associated. But the central theme is, no question, the central theme is the telling over of the story. That is fundamental. This is the ultimate educational experience, where we blaze this into the consciousness of our children as we tell the story of the Exodus. Now listen to the words. Mitzvahs esse shel Torah. It is a positive mitzvah of the Torah. Now, the next clause in that sentence, I will give you 10 seconds to think how you would have phrased the next few words. No question, you would have said, to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And not only that, but as soon as the Rambam finishes the sentence, he gives you, as he always does, the source. And the source is the verse or verses in the Torah that say, V'garata lebincha, tell your son or tell your child on this day about the Exodus from Egypt. So there's no question that what the Rambam's addressing is the story of the Exodus, and he quotes the verse that says that. But listen to his words. Mitzvahs esse shel Torah. It is a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper benissim v'niflois, about the miracles and wonders Shiur Lavoisenu that happened to our forefathers at this time. Not a word about the Exodus. Now this is beyond astounding. The Torah does not say in the verses that the Rambam relates to, the Torah doesn't say talk about miracles. The Torah says talk about the Exodus. And the Rambam, codifying the law in the Torah, says, talk about miracles. What is going on? If the Rambam said, talk about a miraculous exodus, maybe I could understand. But he omits the mitzvah that the Torah says you have to do. This is, my friends, this is beyond astounding. The Torah couldn't be clearer. Tell your children about the day you left Egypt. And the Rambam says, this means, tell your children about the miracles and wonders that happened to our forefathers on this night. Where are the words that the Torah commands us to say? Evidently, you are forced to say, there's no way out of this, that the Rambam understands that the mitzvah of talking about the Exodus from Egypt, the mitzvah is talking about miracles. The Rambam understands that the words in the Torah talk about the Exodus from Egypt are literally telling you to talk about miracles. And they are not telling you to talk about an Exodus. I mean, after all, the Rambam omits those words. Now, this is beyond amazing. Of course, let's be clear. The Rambam does not mean you don't talk about the Exodus. And how do we know that? First of all, it's inconceivable that you wouldn't talk about the Exodus. And secondly, the Rambam himself gives you the wording of the Haggadah. The Rambam actually writes the words that you say in the Haggadah. And it's the same, virtually the same as we have. For one or two small differences. And he certainly includes the story of the Exodus from Egypt. There's no question there's no question the Rambam intends you to tell the story. But when he says the way you fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story of the Exodus is to tell your children about miracles. Now, in case you think I'm putting too fine a point on it, or there's something strange that has simply been omitted, or some version in the Rambam that was misprinted, go down the page, and in the two or three halachas further down on the very same page, the Rambam says the following thing: Lefidaitu shel ben aviv melamdei. According to the intellect or the maturity of the child, the parent teaches him. Obviously, this is the Rambam relating to the four sons. We know that each of the sons has a different mentality, a different mindset, and according to that, you are teaching the child. And the Rambam codifies that law as lefi daito shel ben, according to the understanding of the child, the parent teaches him. And he says this: Im haya ben cotton v'tipesh, if the child was very, very small or mentally undeveloped, this is the child she'enu yodeh lishol. By the way, the Rambam does not include a category of talking to the wicked son. Right? And of course, the Gaon of Vilna explains that. The Gaon of Vilna says we don't talk to the wicked son. We say something to him, but we're not telling him the story. He's not amenable, not available to hear the story. Anyway, that's an aside. So the Rambam says like this: if your child was very, very small or very immature, you say, Beni, my child, we were once slaves in Egypt. And you make it graphic. The Rambam says you take a servant, no doubt in most of your homes. You have many uniformed servants, I'm sure, walking around doing your bidding. Well, if you do, says the Rambam, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You take a servant and you say to your child, we were like this servant, and Hashem redeemed us on this day, on this night, he took us out of Egypt, which means, oh, here you do talk about an Exodus. You do talk about redemption from slavery to freedom. Where do you talk about it? To the smallest child who cannot understand anything. But then he says, Ve'im ha'yagon haben godel umevin. But if the child was older and more able to understand, you say, my child, on this night we experienced miracles. Nothing to do with leaving Egypt. Again. So in summary, what you're learning here in the Rambam is that his codification of the law of talking about the Exodus from Egypt is to tell your children about miracles. Telling them about an Exodus literally, where do you say that? At the most basic level. To a child who is so small that he couldn't understand anything abstract, you say we were redeemed, we were slaves in Egypt and we were saved. But that's not the point. The point is that we experienced miracles. And this is beyond amazing. You know, we take the Torah very, very seriously and very literally, you know, in every possible circumstance. And if the Torah gives us such a clear mitzvah, tell your child on this night, tell your children, right? Tell over the story of the Exodus, the day that you left Egypt, and Torah says it more than once, and the Rambam completely omits those words. This is beyond astounding. Okay, let's try to lay down a few points here that I hope will answer this question. And of course, when you tell your own child or guests or family relevant to their particular intellectual level, you'll adapt this accordingly and try to apply some of what is contained here. Let's take a step back and ask again the most basic of all questions. Why is telling the story and celebrating Pesach and reliving Pesach the foundation of Judaism? And again, let me try to express how strange this is. There are other things that would appear to be more fundamental. The most obvious one is receiving the Torah. You know, leaving Egypt was for the purpose of traveling to Sinai. And when you have a journey that begins at an origin and ends at a destination, no one in his right mind refers to the journey by the name of the point of origin. You just don't do that. If you're going on a journey someplace, you're going on vacation, or you're going for some purpose to someplace, the journey is called, and the plane is called, and the train is called. It's called a Paris train, or it's called a New York flight. You don't name a flight from where it leaves. Obviously, it's important to know where it leaves, otherwise you'll miss the train. But that's not the point of the journey. We name journeys for destinations. And this was a journey for the purpose of receiving the Torah. That was the purpose of the Exodus. Was, in fact, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu long before the Exodus happened, your people will serve me on this mountain. When Hashem spoke to Moshe at the burning bush, it was on the slopes of Mount Sinai. And Hashem said, on this mountain they will again serve me. By the way, the imagery is wonderful to understand. What was the image? Moshe Rabbeinu seeing a bush burning and not being consumed. Isn't that the antecedent of all of Jewish history? A nation burning through history and it not being consumed? And isn't that why we were ignited into that fire at Sinai, when we stood on a mountain that was lit with the thunder and lightning and ablaze with Hashem's presence? That's exactly the premonition of that. The presaging event of that was when Moshe Rabbeinu himself stood there and saw the incident that gave the clue to what would be happening later when he would stand there with his entire people. But at that time, Hashem said that they will serve me on this mountain. The tachlis, the point of becoming the Jewish people, is to bring the Torah to the world. But that's not how we celebrate Judaism. We celebrate Judaism as Zeicher Letzias Mitzrayim, in memory of the day we left Egypt. Why not destination? It's true we remember Sinai. It's true we have a mitzvah, one of 6 remembrances every day. Incidentally, the first of those remembrances is Yom Asher Yitzasim Me'eretz Mitzrayim, is from the day you left Egypt. The second one is the day you got to Sinai. And then there's remembering Amalek, which is the people that tried to interfere on that journey. And then there's remembering how we failed in the desert and we angered Hashem on that journey. And then there's remembering what happened to Miriam on that journey. 5 of the 6 are all relating to the journey from Egypt to Sinai. The 6th one happens to be about Shabbos, which is totally the ultimate tachlis. Shabbos is beyond the world and outside the world. Those are the 6 things we remember each day. But it's amazing that of the things we remember each day, only one of them, namely the Exodus, is a mitzvah to say every day and every night. We said at the Pesach Seder, we say that we said all the days of our life. What does all the days of our life mean? It means days and nights. And from that we learn, and we say it openly, we repeat it every year at the Pesach Seder. We have a mitzvah to say explicitly about the leaving of Egypt. There's no such mitzvah every day. Talk about Sinai. So number 1, there's a mitzvah to say it. Number 2, all the mitzvahs in the Torah are not zecher lekabbalas haTorah. They're all zecher letzias Mitzrayim. First of all, half the mitzvahs in the Torah actually say so. Whether it's ribis, which is taking interest, whether it's false weights and measures, whether it's not eating insects, whether it's the mezuzah on your door, mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah in the Torah are because you left Egypt. Incredibly. And not only that, some of Mepharshim say every single mitzvah. You know why? Because Shabbos, for example, is given Zeicher Letzias Mitzrayim. And Shabbos contains all the mitzvahs, right? The Torah tells us that Shabbos is equivalent to all the mitzvahs in the Torah. So we have one mitzvah that contains all the mitzvahs in the Torah, and the purpose of that mitzvah is to remember Egypt. Which means, as the Ramban puts it quite clearly, that all the mitzvahs in the Torah, most of them explicitly and all of them implicitly, are given to remember the Exodus. Not Sinai, but to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Which means that you're performing mitzvahs, hundreds and hundreds of mitzvahs, for what? For a consciousness of the time we left Egypt. Why is that the focus? More astounding, as we said before, Shabbos celebrates the creation itself. And what do we say when we make Kiddush? We say Zeicher, we say L'Maaseh Bereshis, to be sure. This is a commemoration of the moment of creation. And then we say Zeicher Letzias Mitzrayim, that Shabbos reminds us of the leaving of Egypt. First of all, the mitzvah of Shabbos was given slightly after we left Egypt at Mara. but surely if you're going to say something on Shabbos that isn't Shabbos itself, you should refer to the receiving of the Torah. First of all, the Torah was given on Shabbos. What could be more appropriate? No, we stay, we make Kiddush, Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. That is the be-all and the end-all. Why? Why is that so fundamental? And we could put the question in many other ways, but anyone who knows anything about Judaism knows that the whole exercise is to remember the Exodus, and that is absolutely paramount. What better example could I give you than the Pesach Seder? We have the most amazing, intense educational experience called the Pesach Seder. The children should get up from that experience so fired and so ignited. A beautiful clue to this is Gidon. When Gidon met a Malach, an angel appeared to Gidon, right? One of the great Shoftim. The Malach appeared to him, and amazingly, how did the conversation begin? Gidon said to the Malach, "Where are your signs and wonders?" That's a way to greet an angel, right? The angel appears to him. Gidon says to him, where are your miracles? What sort of question is that? Mefoshim say it was the first day of Pesach, and the night before he sat at his father's Seder table, and he was so ablaze with the consciousness of living in the world of the miraculous that as soon as he saw a manifestation of Hashem, all he wanted to know was where are the miracles. A child should get up from the Seder with that focus of living in this world of miraculous frogs exploding all over the place and water becoming blood and hell. That's the experience. We don't do that for giving of the Torah. What do we do for giving of the Torah? We put some fruits and some flowers in the shul. We dance with the Torah. No one's knocking it, but we don't have a Pesach Seder, right? So the most intense educational experience that gives the children the transmission of what Torah is the Pesach Seder. That's it. Why that moment? Why not Avram starting the whole religion himself? Or why not the story of the Shvatim and Joseph and the brothers? I mean, the giving of the Torah. There's no end of opportunities. It's leaving Egypt that becomes the critical educational experience. And that is what we transmit. There's a wonderful painter, Nachum Kruger. His name's Nachum Kruger, which we got to know each other living in Israel. And he has a very good eye and sort of spiritual view that he's able in a remarkable way to put into his paintings. And one of his paintings is something I'll never forget. Maybe you can see it someplace. I'm sure it's been reprinted. It's the most beautiful rendition of a bird's eye view looking down on the scene. And the first thing you see is passing your eye is an electric cord, like a cord going to an electric light bulb. And you follow it down, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet below you. And it ends in a little light bulb. And the light bulb is hanging over a table. And on the two sides of your vision, just out of your range of vision, are massive walls of water. And these walls of water are going down in perspective. And in the bottom of the cleft between the two walls of water, this little light bulb hanging over a little table is sitting a family, a father and a mother and children, and they're celebrating a Pesach Seder in the split ocean, right? In other words, they're sitting at their table, the light shining on their table, they've got their Haggadahs and their matzahs and surrounding them with these walls of water. And, that's the experience of the Pesach Seder, is sitting in Kriyas Yam Suf, experiencing that. When I think of that painting, I always think to myself, I think to that family sitting there with the walls of water around them. I imagine one of the parents looking over their shoulder, and at a little distance, they see their parents and their Seder table where they learned that story. And a little bit further back, they see their grandparents telling it over to their parents. And it's all happening in that graphic image. That's how we live and transmit our Judaism. And it is the Pesach Seder and the experience of leaving Egypt. And the question here, of course, is why is that the focus and not any other time where we have that imperative to burn into our next generation's awareness, that experience? Okay, so this is what needs explanation. Let's talk about the two elements we began with, and I hope the picture will start to become clear. The first one is Hashem's name. Again, this is a remarkable proposition. Hashem says to Moshe, Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. That means my name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, that name, I never made known to the others. The truth is they knew about the name, but they never experienced it. And without getting into technicalities, what Hashem really meant here is the name Ekia, which means the way Hashem relates to that name. Ekia means, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the way you would say a name, which means the name of existence, past, present, future, creator of all existence. But when Hashem would speak about that name, about himself, he would start not with the Yud, which means the future tense, but the Aleph, which means speaking about it myself. Ekia, I am what I am. I am what I will be what I will be, so to speak. When Moshe asks Hashem for his name that he should transmit to the Jewish people, it's that particular version of the name. Without now in this particular discussion going into those two nuances, the point to make here at least is that Hashem's name of essence, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. The Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, those generations of Jewish history were not in contact with that name. They knew Hashem through other names. The name Yud-Kei, the name Shakai, for example, Shin, Dalet, Yud, which is the name that controls the creation or limits the creation, gives it its form. Of course they knew Hashem. They were Nevi'im. Avram Avinu was a Navi, and he experienced miracles of his own. But the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, for some reason, they were not in contact with. The Exodus brought us into contact with the name of Hashem. Let's just spend, again, perhaps this is not but too sophisticated maybe for the children at the Seder in its depth, but at least just to grapple with this for a brief time. The name of Hashem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means many, many things, but one of them means coming to contact with the paradoxical root of existence. Let me try to explain what I mean, and then when we talk about miracles, I hope it'll be a little clearer. The name of Hashem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is a name not only of essence and existence, but it's a name of paradoxical essence. Let me try to explain this in this way. You know that each name of Hashem each name of God is a name of a midah. As Hashem himself expresses it, I cannot be known as I am. I can only be known by my actions, right? Lefi ma'asai ani noda. I'm known by my actions. You can't hope to know Hashem directly. If you knew him directly, you'd be absorbed into that oneness. Even Moshe Rabbeinu could not make direct contact with that name while alive. He could make 49 of the 50 levels, but not the 50th. So Hashem says, you cannot know me intimately and personally. You can know my actions. And each name is an indication of an action. Shin Dalet Yud, that name means the one that controls the creation. Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, Adoi, right? That name is Adonakol. That's the master of creation. Elokim, that is the name of the powers of nature. Each name, Hashem Tzvakos, each name is a name that indicates a function or an extension of Hashem into the world, what we call a midah. Now, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei name, amazingly, is described very often as the midah of, I'm sure you all know, the midah of Rachamim, right? Which is mercy. Not Chesed, but Rachamim. The difference between Chesed and Rachamim is that Chesed is kindness without reason. Rachamim is kindness in response to a need. Chesed means you are kind. Rachamim means mercy, means someone's hungry, you respond and feed them. Someone needs clothing, you clothe them. Someone has a need, you respond. Mercy is a person who responds mercifully when a need is present. Chesed is bigger than that. Chesed is a kindness that exists not only because there's a need. That's an intrinsic quality of Chesed, which begins a process of giving for no reason, and even when there's no need. But Rachamim is the name of mercy. It's a midah. One of the midahs of Hashem is Rachamim. Now, this is very peculiar. Think about it for a moment. If Hashem's name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, is the name of a midah, how can it be the name of Hashem himself? Let's understand how strange this is. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the name of Hashem himself, the Shema Etzem, we call it. That means the name of essence, of what he actually is, if we can say such a thing. That's not one midah. One midah is one of many. Hashem is the powers behind nature. He is the power that organizes and limits the natural world. He is the one who is the master of the world. Each name is a different midah. Rachamim, mercy, is another midah. Again, if the name is the name of a midah, of one particular midah means a measure, a measurement, a measured amount, so to speak, one of many. If Hashem's name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, is the name of a midah, then how can it be the name of Hashem in totality? Am I making any sense? Anybody? Yeah. That's the problem. Listen to the answer to this question. It's a marvelous thing to understand. Rachamim is more than a midah. The nature of Rachamim, the nature of mercy, is that it's a combination of extremes. To put it a little bit Kabbalistically, if you'll permit me, Rachamim is in the center. Right? Rachamim. Remember the Rechem, which is the womb, which is the name of the same word, the root of the Rachamim, is the center of the body. Most of the body is duplicated, right? Most of the human body has duplicated functions. Almost nothing is in the center of the body and single. Only the bris, milah, the circumcision, and the bris haloshen, the tongue, and in the female, the rechem. Those are the central organs. Now's not time to go into why that is and what it means. But rachamim is a central feature. As we know, the body is made up, and the spiritual world is made up of what we call chadar, chesed, din, rachamim. Chesed on the right side, din on the left side, and rachamim in the center. Rachamim is a combination, right, of an obligation, a need, and a kindness that is done. So rachamim is a combination of right and left. Listen carefully, please. This is important to understand and wonderful to understand. Rachamim is a quality. We call it mercy, but its Kabbalistic nature is it's a combination of opposites. Chesed extreme on the right, din extreme on the left, rachamim, chadar, rachamim in the middle, a balance point, a combination between the two, responding as much as is needed, not too little and not too much. That's what rachamim is, right? A parent who's responding to a child's needs, not too much, not too little. The breast gives enough milk, not too little and not too much. Both would be harmful. When the rain falls, Hashem makes the rain fall. Too little would not be enough rain. Too much would be a flood. So the real chesed, the real application of chesed is where it's balanced. It's a giving and a withholding at the same time. And that is the middle quality called rachamim. So Hashem's name of rachamim, here comes the essence, the key, is a name that combines extremes. It is not just a quality like the other qualities. The nature of rachamim is that it combines extremes, even though that's paradoxical. You can't give and not give at the same time. How do you do that? Giving means giving unlimited. Chesed means unlimited giving. Din means total, absolute cutting off and discipline. How do you put two opposites together? Rachamim is the putting of the two opposites together. Hashem's name, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, is a combination of impossible opposites. For example, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is one, but it has 4 letters. How does a name that indicates Hashem's oneness? 4 letters. Hashem Echad is one, and yet is the source of ribui. He's the source of multiplicity in the world. How does that work? Another example. The Torah says that Hashem wanted to begin the creation with din, total discipline, and saw that the world couldn't survive with din. So what did he do? Amad v'shitef imay midas rachamim. Hashem arose and combined with the din a quality of rachamim. You can't combine rachamim with din. As soon as you put rachamim in, it's not din anymore. Din means 100%. Rachamim means you make allowances, 99%. You can't have 100%. That's 99%. You can't do that. If it's 100% din, it's din. If it's rachamim, it's not din. It may be very good, but it's din means one. You can't have approximate exactness, right? Din means exact, and rachamim means he wanted to create the world with din. That means one move out of line, you disappear. A world like that can't exist. So Hashem combined the What do you mean combined rachamim with din? If you put rachamim in, there's no din anymore. No, he did both. Is that possible? Well, for Hashem it is, but not in our minds. One further example. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the name of Yediah and Bechira. That Hashem knows the future and you have free will anyway. Do those coexist? Impossible, but they do. And we could go on and on. The name of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the mystical, miraculous, amazing name of essence that is unitary and combines parts. It is foreknowledge and free will as well. It's din and rachamim incredibly mixed together. And therefore the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the name of paradoxical essence, the thing itself. All the others are midas. The others are single midas of Hashem, miraculous and divine, to be sure. But they indicate a way of operating in the world. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the paradoxical essence of all things, and yet it's one. Now, with that background, and that was not known before, the Exodus from Egypt was an amazing transition into making contact with that name. Until then, the Jewish people, the forefathers and antecedents, the forebears of the Jewish people, they knew Hashem, but they knew him at a distance. They never moved into contact with that paradoxical name, which is the name of essence itself. That was the purpose of the Exodus. And we begin to hear why this is fundamental. By the time they reached Sinai, they made a deeper connection with that name, to be sure. There was an intimate bonding with that name, to the extent that they died, which means a complete bond. The neshamas flew out of their bodies and fused with Hashem, so to speak. That was the culmination of the Egyptian Exodus. Obviously, it's a story that begins there and ends at Sinai. But the paradigm shift, if you like, the moment of transition from one world to another, from one mode of being, was when they left Egypt. And the definitive way of saying it is they made contact for the first time in history with that name. Let me bring it down one step in a way that I hope will make this a little bit clearer. Miracles. They experienced a new type of miracle. Rashi calls it nes b'seich nes. Let's explain. This is worth explaining at some length. And even if only this point alone is something that comes across and you can share with your Seder participants, it will be worth it. Miracles are the fundamental of the Torah, as we said. There are a number of categories of miracle. And again, we don't have time to go into them fully, but let's try at least approach the subject. In a book called As Dawn Ends the Night, I try to give an overview of this. And if you would like to look up some sources and see it in more detail, you're welcome to take a look over there. But let me give you a digest of the subject and understand what radical shift occurred when we left Egypt. And these things are enough to set the heart on fire, as I hope you'll see. Miracles fall into a number of classes. The most obvious basic division is what we call Nisim Nistorim and Nisim Nigli. That means hidden miracles and revealed miracles. Hidden miracles are things that we call coincidences. Remarkable coincidences, so unlikely that when they happen, you see that someone is speaking to you. But they're not impossible. The rule about a nes nista is that it's wildly improbable, but not physically impossible. It does not break a law of nature. A nes nigla is something that is not just improbable or unlikely, it breaks a law of nature. That's a categorical distinction. A nes nigla, a nes nista, hidden miracle is you're going for a run, you accidentally run off the edge of a cliff. Not good. But as you fall, you grab onto a twig growing out of the cliff and you hang there dangerously dangling over thousands of feet of empty space. And as you do, you feel the twig snap. But just as it snaps, there happens to be somebody practicing throwing ropes over the edges of cliffs that day. And you grab the rope and he pulls you back up. That would leave you pretty frum for 2 or 3 days, I can assure you. But it's not impossible. If you tell that story to your skeptical atheistic scientists, they will say, well, it's quite amazing, but these things happen. But you know that it's significant and you'd be changed forever. However, if you run off a cliff and you drop and you hang onto a twig and it snaps and you levitate up and float back on, it would leave you pretty frum for at least a week. That is called a nes nigla. And the reason is because it breaks a law of nature. That is categorically different. That is a whole different category, and that we do not experience today. We experience only the Nisim Nistorim now. There was a time in history from the creation until about 2,300 years ago, specifically between Purim and Hanukkah, where those miracles ended, and we moved into a post-prophetic era where we no longer have prophecy and we no longer have miracles. To be sure, we have the hidden miracles now. We have the incredible coincidences in individual life and in Jewish national life, and it's a mitzvah to document them and to perceive them. That's what Purim teaches. What did Purim teach? Purim came on the scene to show you that even when no law of nature is broken, you see Hashem operating. No law of nature was broken in Purim. There were no dead revived, no rivers split, no ocean split, no man fell from heaven. What happened on Purim? There was a king. He didn't happen to know his wife is Jewish. Particular night that he couldn't sleep, Haman happened to. A whole bunch of coincidences which lead from the Jewish people's destruction to the unprecedented acceptance of Torah. But nothing abnormal happened. And that's why the Megillah does not reveal Hashem's name. The Megillah doesn't describe miracles. Megillah means Megillah, which means to roll up, and it means Megaleh, to reveal. Megillah is called Purim, which means the luck of the draw. Esther means the hidden one. Wherever you touch Purim, you see we're moving into the darkness. And 150 years later, at Hanukkah, there's nothing at all. No Megillah at all. Nothing, not even a Mishnah. Nothing. The only thing that happens at Hanukkah, a wave goodbye from the land of miracles. After the war was won, some candles burned for 8 days. Amazing. But that was the last time we ever saw a break in a law of nature. And that is a categorical shift from the prophetic era. Hanukkah, Purim, Hanukkah is the transition. And after that, for the last 2,200 years, we've seen no reveal and no prophecy. The two go hand in hand. This is not the time to discuss why prophecy and miracles go hand in hand, but they do. So there are two categories of miracle. The revealed, which existed from the creation until the time of Purim Hanukkah, and then the hidden miracles that continue thereafter. I'll refer to a question here which we're not going to discuss in this session. You can look this up, and it's a wonderful subject. What about the miracles of the time of the Gemara? The time of the Gemara was long after the closing of prophecy, and they were able to manipulate nature with ease, reviving the dead and splitting rivers, and no problem. That's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful section in the writings of the Leshem. I try to document it in detail and quote him. In the book that I refer to, this is a wonderful subject. It's not today's subject. But believe me, take it from me, the categorical type of miracles of Hashem revealing himself in the world, the presence of Hashem directly operating in the world, those stopped at the time of Chanukah Purim. Now, there's a third kind of miracle. That's the one we need to focus on. Pay attention, please. Revealed miracles have two categories. There are ordinary revealed miracles, normal ones, and they're miracles within miracles that Rashi calls nes b'seich nes. What does this mean? Yeah, what I'm giving you is a digest of the writings of the great Baal HaLeshem. He's the one who teaches this most explicitly, but you'll see this is really written everywhere when you go into it. A normal miracle. When I say a normal, I mean here the open miracles are miracles where law of nature is set aside, but there's nothing impossible or paradoxical. Avram Avinu, Abraham, is thrown into a fire and he doesn't burn. Is that miraculous? Yes. Is it paradoxical? No, there are things that don't burn. It's not, it doesn't, again, intellectually it could be. There are some substances that don't burn. People could be protected against fire. So he's thrown into a fire and he doesn't burn. Miraculous to be sure, but it's not a revelation of the paradoxical heart of existence. When Moshe Rabbeinu sees the bush burning, he doesn't see a bush that is protected from fire. He sees a bush burning and not burning at the same time. This is beyond human. When Moshe Rabbeinu's attention was caught by a bush burning and not burning at the same time, he didn't see a bush with sort of fire around it. He saw a bush burning in every sense and yet not being consumed by the fire. That was his introduction to a new class of miracle that Rashi calls nes b'seich nes. And from there on, those miracles explode. For example, notice, by the way, that when he sees that miracle for the first time is when Hashem tells him, take off your shoes. You're now making contact with me. And Hashem then brought him into contact with Shmi Hashem. What happens from then? The process of the Exodus begins from there, and all the miracles from then on become total paradoxes. For example, the Nile becomes blood. But you know, the Nile was blood for the Egyptians and water for the Jews. So the children think, well, you know, it changed rapidly. You know, the children are all taught the Medrash that if the Egyptians wanted to drink water, they had to get it from the Jews. If they tried to grab a cup of water from the Jews, it was blood. So the kids think, well, it was water in the cup of the Jew. As soon as the Egyptian grabbed it, it turned to blood. The Jew takes it back, it turned to water. That's not wrong. Excuse me. That's wrong. The meaning of that miracle was it was water for us and blood for them at the same time. That's what it means. That is not a setting aside of nature. That's paradoxically impossible to understand. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And that name of Hashem is all things are one thing. This is not a setting aside of things you understand. This is a complete blowing away. This is the Achdus Hashem, which means he is everything. It looks like there's a world of different things and different parts and up and down and right and left. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's all there is. What do you mean that's all there is when the world comprises parts? Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's all him. This goes on. When the hail falls with fire inside, it was hail, ice, and fire. So the children think, well, it was blocks of ice. And inside the block of ice, there was like a space. There was a candle sort of burning in the space. No, that's not what it means. It was ice and fire at the same time. Two paradoxical opposites that cannot possibly coexist. That's what the miracle was. Hashem was revealing Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which means I am all that there is. Not. The Sfas Emes takes it even further. Look this up. It's in the very first piece, first couple of pieces in Sfas Emes, which is beyond amazing. Listen to what he says. He says, when the Jewish people walked through the ocean that split, they walked on dry land underwater. You know, people think it means the ocean split, so the walls of water stood up and the Jews walked. That's not what the Torah says. The Torah says twice, Bnei Yisrael halchu betoch hayam bayabasha. That's what it says. B'seich hayam bayabasha. In the midst of the ocean on dry land. It doesn't say where the ocean was. It says in the midst of the ocean on dry land. Was the ocean split or not? Both. Is that possible? No, but that's what happened. That's what he says. Why does he have to say that? It's good enough that the ocean split. Amazing, miraculous. The walls of water with a fish in them and, you know, the Jews picking fruit out of all those midrashim. That's not what he says, this Sfas Emes. It's a very short piece. It's 10 lines long. He says, when the Torah says the Jewish people walked on dry land in the midst of the ocean, You have to read what the Torah is saying. These are paradoxical miracles, where Hashem's oneness is revealed at the opposites at the same time. Din and Rachamim at the same time. Not one knocking out the other temporarily. This is a whole new class of miracle. Rashi emphasizes this when the snake, the stick of Aaron, swallowed the snakes. It didn't swallow the snakes as a snake. That would be a normal miracle. It swallowed the snakes as a stick. Rashi says, Nes b'seich nes. Right? Sticks don't swallow things. Right? Okay. This culminates in the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, they build the sanctuary, the tabernacle, the Mishkan in the desert. And there in the center of the Mishkan, in the Kodesh Kodashim, space occupies no space. How does the Gemara put it? Aron eino min amida. The Aron occupies no space. The Aron, the ark containing the Torah, occupies no space. What does that mean? It means if you measured from wall to wall, you got a certain measurement. And if you measured from wall to Aron, you got the same measurement. Now, 1 second. So people think, well, maybe the Aron shrank. The Aron didn't shrink. If it shrank, it would be possible, invalid. It has certain measurements. Well, maybe the room expanded. The room didn't expand. It has certain measurements. There was an object occupying space that did not occupy space. What does that mean? We're talking here about the center of space. The Orin, the Kodesh Kodashim, is the center of existence. And therefore, where space comes into being, where did that point stand later? On the Even Shasiyah, the rock of formation in the temple, the Beis HaMikdash. The Mishkan was a mobile Mikdash. But when it became the Mikdash in the Kodesh Kodashim, in that particular point on earth, there was no space occupying space. You could make measurements, and the measurements would consist of. This is not a setting aside of nature. An object shrinking miraculously is that, and a room expanding. This is nothing expands, nothing shrinks, and yet space is not space. This is the nature of leaving Egypt. So let's sum it up. Obviously, there are many, many other dimensions to this, many, many dimensions, but these are enough, I think, to indicate the answer to our question. Why is leaving Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim, why is that the focus of all that we are? That's where we shifted from one type of existence to another. By the time you reached Sinai and received the Torah, it was a fulfillment of living in that dimension. To be sure, absolutely. You know, perhaps it's worth mentioning this, although we've said this before, but it's worth understanding. Why do we need to stand at Sinai altogether? Here's another misunderstood Rambam. The Rambam says, you know, somebody who believes because of miracles, we're talking about miracles, even these miracles that occurred in Egypt, says the Rambam, Hamamin al pia oisos, somebody who believes because of miracles, yesh beliboy dofi. That's his language. He has in his heart something. Dofi means a little bit of a taint, a little bit of an outside flavor. Says the Rambam, you know why? Because miracles could always be done by sorcery and magic. The Rambam's not implying for a moment that anyone in Egypt thought that the miracles in Egypt were done by sorcery. But the Rambam says, since miracles could be done, since a great manipulator or sorcerer like the Egyptians could manipulate nature, there's always a little bit of doubt when you see miracles like that. But when they stood at Sinai, as the language of the Ramban, our eyes heard and no one else, our ears heard and no one else, our eyes saw and no stranger, then there's no doubt anymore. My friends, people misunderstand that Rambam. Rav Moshe used to be particular about this. People think it means in Egypt there was still some doubt. You know, they saw the miracles, but, you know, maybe it's sorcery. They stood at Sinai, they met Hashem, there's no doubt. That's a gross error. In Egypt, there was no misunderstanding. No one had any doubts. How do we know that? Because Hashem said to Moshe no less than 5 times, I'm going to reveal myself in miracles in Egypt in order that you and Paroi and the Egyptians should know who I am. They should even know. And did they get the message? They got the message, and they were not trying. For many, the first number of plagues, they tried desperately to avoid the message. But in the end, they got the message, which means that miracles are good enough. Miracles are good enough to get the message, even if you're trying not to, which means that the miracles in Egypt were certainly good enough. So then why do you need to stand at Sinai? And let's put it another way. If the miracles in Egypt leave a little bit of doubt, then it's very unfair to expect the Egyptians to get the message. Why didn't they stand at Sinai? Again, here's the question. Are the miracles in Egypt good enough to get the message or not? If they're good enough, then why do we need to go to Sinai? What is the Rambam's better level of knowledge at Sinai? Why do you need that? And if they're not good enough, then how do you expect the Egyptians to get the message if the proof is not good enough? And not only that, Rav Tzadok HaKohen says that even Sinai is not clinching 100%. You could wake up the next day and think you had a hallucination the day before. Rav Tzadok HaKohen says astoundingly that if Aristotle would have been at Sinai, the next day he would have brought Moshe Rabbeinu 100 proofs that it couldn't have happened the day before. That's what he says. So here's the question. Listen carefully. If the miracles in Egypt leave doubt, then how come the Egyptians got the message? And if they don't leave doubt, then how come we need to go to Sinai? Listen to the answer. The miracles in Egypt were 100% good enough. We got the message, the Egyptians got the message. Going to Sinai was not for a better level of proof. Going to Sinai was for a different type of knowledge. Listen to Rav Moshe's expression. Zelo inyan shel otzmat hahochacha. It wasn't a question of the power of the proof. Ze inyan shel eichut hayediah. It's a matter of the quality of the knowledge. We went to Sinai to get married. We went to Sinai to be kissed by the kisses of his mouth, as it says in Shiur. We went to Sinai to have an intimate meeting with Hashem. What happened in Egypt was 100% proof, but it's proof at a distance. Those things could be done by sorcery as well. You come to a conclusion. You come to a deduction that Hashem exists. Egyptians got the message. We got the message. But that's not direct contact. We did not go to Sinai to get a clinching proof in case we still doubted. Nobody doubted by the time we left Egypt and went through the ocean. We went to Sinai to have an intimate meeting and to be burnt into a relationship with Hashem, fused into one. That was the culmination of the experience. But the paradigm shift took place when we left Egypt. And that's where we became a new people. And therefore, let's wrap it up. When you sit at your Seder and the Rambam says, mitzvahs eseh shel Torah, it's a positive mitzvah of the Torah to tell, not about the Exodus, about the nisim v'niflos, the miracles and wonders. You know why? Because that's what made us who we are. The fact that we went from one country to another is not the point. The fact that we went from slavery to freedom, it's not the point. It's important. And we tell it. And we need to know it, but it's not the point. Every nation has a geopolitical story. Every nation went from some place to some other place. Every nation went from subjugation to everybody. You know, the South Africans, they didn't like the British, so they trekked away. The Americans had the same problem, by the way. I don't mean to offend the British, but, you know, the Americans had the same problem and they sought independence. Every country has its geopolitical story. That's not what we are. The important thing about the Exodus is that we left the natural and blew out into the supernatural. That's what you got to get across at the Seder. If you tell your children we were slaves and we were freed, that's not so important. You tell me when one country went to another country, that's not so important. You only tell that to a child who can't understand more. What's important about us is that we left the natural and moved into the supernatural, and we moved from the supernatural into the supernatural. We moved from the supernatural into a relationship with Hashem that is beyond description. That's what's important about us. That's what a child has to get up with. That's what happened at the leaving on Egypt. It culminated at Sinai. Obviously, that's the end of the journey, where we were married and, so to speak, bonded into personally experiencing Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Absolutely. But when that began, that journey began, where we exploded into being an utterly different type of human being. That was what happened when we left Egypt. And that's when we moved into an awareness of Hashem's name for the first time, not just knowing it at a distance, experiencing midas, experiencing manipulations of nature that are outstanding and amazing. We moved into beginning making direct contact with a totally different type of a world. We became a totally different type of creature as a nation at that point. And therefore, that is the idea. Practical output. Tell the story. When you tell the story, you obviously phrase it in all the words of the Haggadah and all the things that happened. But the point of the story is that we became a completely transcendent and supernatural people, that for the last 4,000 years, 3,300 years since that moment, they've been trying to kill us, and we're still here, right? Under the worst of possible circumstances. That is the miracle of the Jew, and it's because we live in another dimension entirely. This is such an important message. It's, we live in a world that is scientifically bound, limited by politics and notions of physics, and yet this is who we are. We are people who go back to a moment of miracle and miracle within miracle, right? Which is another whole, literally indescribable dimension of existence. Anyway, this is introduction to the Pesach Seder. I'll finish with this. The Sfas Emes, actually, Chidush Harim, and others put it like this. They say we sit at a Seder and we talk about things that completely break the natural order, completely break the natural order beyond description. And what do we call it? A Seder. Seder means things that go in order. You know what? That's our order. Maharal talks about this in his second Hakdama to his book on Pesach. That's our order. We're sitting at a table celebrating total blow-away, frogs exploding from frog, and we feel totally comfortable. That Akol Seder, that's the way a Jew exists. That's our Seder. Anyway, have a wonderful Pesach and a wonderful Seder.